Welcome to Reigniting You, the show that explores a variety of topics and timely issues for making successful mid to late career transitions with a renewed sense of purpose and fulfillment for the next phase of your career and life, regardless of your age. Now, here's your host, Lisa Downs.
Welcome to Reigniting You, where we talk all things career transition for those age 40 plus. I'm Lisa Downs, Seattle-based career and retirement transition coach. Great to be here with you today, and our producer, Eric. Hey, Eric, Merry Christmas a little early.
Yeah, the same to you.
Yeah. Are you looking forward to the holiday?
I always feel like a little bit, not full-on Scrooge, but a little bit of hesitation, I guess, until like right up till Christmas, and then once Christmas hits, I'm all about it. It's just one of those things. I don't know why, but I've always had just a little bit of trouble getting in the full swing of things before the actual holiday itself.
Get a little Scroogey leading up to it.
Yeah, I try not to be a grump, but
it's all right. Whatever works. Well, we've got another great show lined up for you today. My guest is Career Development Manager and former Green Beret, Dave Montore. First, though, are a few career-related stories from the last few days. According to the New York Times, some of the largest corporations in America are joining an effort to push back against artificial intelligence software increasingly used in hiring due to a concern over potentially biased results. The Data and Trust Alliance has signed up employers such as CVS Health, Deloitte, GM, Humana, IBM, MasterCard, Meta, the parent company of Facebook, Nike, and Walmart. The group developed an evaluation and scoring system for AI software to detect and combat algorithmic bias. The Data and Trust Alliance seeks to address the potential danger of powerful algorithms being used in workforce decisions early rather than react after widespread harms are apparent, as Silicon Valley did on matters like privacy and amplification of misinformation. Governments around the world are moving to adopt rules and regulations. The European Union has proposed a regulatory framework for AI, while the White House is working on a Bill of Rights for AI. The Washington Post reports that Generation Z is feeling the stresses of the pandemic more than any other age group, according to a new U.S. survey just released. Higher proportions of young Americans between the ages of 13 and 24 say the pandemic has made their education, career goals, and social lives more difficult compared with millennials and Generation X. Nearly half of those in the Gen Z age group said the pandemic had made their schooling and career aspirations tougher, according to a survey conducted by the Associated Press NORC Center for Public Affairs Research with funding from MTV. The survey polled 3,764 people between 13 and 56 years of age from September 1st to 19th. About 45% of Gen Z respondents said maintaining ties with friends was harder, and 40% said their romantic relationships had become more difficult. Fewer Americans in older age groups reported the same difficulties, and they were less likely to say that the pandemic had disrupted their education or careers, according to the survey. So, Eric, thoughts on these first couple of stories today?
Yes, anything that companies can do or we can do to make things fair, I always think is an important thing. I mean, when you think about like software and stuff, it's always like the default assumption is that it's completely unbiased, but it's always, going to take on the biases of the people that programmed it.
It is.
So, any steps that we could take, I think, to kind of iron that stuff out is very important, like, a Bill of Rights kind of thing that they're talking about there. So I think that's hopeful.
Yeah, I think so too. Yep, you're right. Because from what I've read, these softwares like, HireVue, VUE is a big one that's out there that does the first, initial screening interviews by use of software these days. And from what I know from those systems, it's all about the input. And so some organizations, from what I've I've read or seen, sometimes they will use characteristics of their highest performing employees, or characteristics of certain personality or profile types to then plug into these systems.
Mhm.
Yeah, so to me, the um, chance of bias is still pretty pretty high.
Absolutely.
So if you get someone who doesn't necessarily fit that mold, then they're kicked out, right? And because the AI is picking up on things that, well, they're not, a match for this or a match for that, or they can tell by your eye movements or something that, that provides certain amount of information. So,
Yeah.
but it's good to see that some of the larger companies are starting to get on board with some regulation for that, or at least if they use those softwares that the interviews are reviewed by humans
Mhm.
as opposed to just the algorithms. So it's interesting. Yeah, we'll see. And I thought it was interesting too about Gen Z. So
Yeah.
it's kind of
Yeah.
sad that they're struggling. I know there's just so much out there right now about mental health and the importance of our mental health and how we deal with these setbacks that people have been experiencing here during the pandemic. So yeah, but I feel for them. I feel for
Yeah,
'em.
I think we're,
Yeah,
regardless of the generation, all kind of stressed out by this.
yeah,
But, I guess they have unique, uh, they're a unique place in life, I guess, to
yeah,
be extra stressed. So,
yeah,
yeah, I mean, a little understanding and a little patience, I think, for everybody at this point in time
yeah.
goes a long way.
I think so. I
Yeah.
felt so bad for a lot of the kids who are graduating last year, so who had their high school or college graduations and
Right.
couldn't have their parties or even have their commencement ceremonies, and felt bad about that, and not being able to really interact with their friends their last year of school, and that's tough. So no matter what, yeah, I agree. I think it's if we're ever going to have compassion toward each other,
Now's the time.
compassion and understanding, this is probably the time. Yeah, for sure.
Agreed.
Well, we got a couple more stories here for you. Reported by the Seattle Times, due to an expected silver tsunami in the maritime industry, with the average age of its workforce around 55, it's looking to attract younger people, people of color, and female identifying and non binary people. More than 3 out of 4 people in Seattle King County's maritime industry, for example, are white, and 74% are men. It's unnecessary to have a 4-year degree to work in the industry, as it can be good enough to do a 6-month training program or get a 2-year certificate from the Seattle Promise program or a local college. The Seattle Maritime Academy also has a 9-month maritime marine engineering certificate program. Organizations such as the Youth Maritime Collaborative, Maritime Blue, Sea Potential, and the Youth Maritime Accelerator Project are working to connect the industry with students and people of color. With the aging out of much of the workforce, there's also an industry push for technological innovation and cleaner environmental practices to help attract younger workers. Lastly, as reported by the Detroit Free Press, beware of job scams if you're looking to work from home or for a flexible job. Consumer watchdogs are warning of an uptick in job scams, such as reshipping scams, as unemployed workers try to find jobs from home during the pandemic. Across Michigan, for example, the Better Business Bureau has received 10 reports of reshipping employment scams in the past 6 months. Many times, victims discovered a job on a popular site such as LinkedIn, Indeed, or Craigslist, or the scammers troll sites looking for victims who have their resumes listed on these sites. And then the scammer might say the potential victim's resume is a good fit for a job opening at their company, according to the BBB. A reshipping scam involves receiving packages for supposed customers in a country unable to access Amazon to sell their products and then reship them elsewhere. The phony jobs use fancy titles such as shipping coordinator or logistics manager or package processing assistant or package handler, when in reality, it's to assist in laundering stolen merchandise. There we go, Eric.
Wow.
Yeah, wow.
There's so many scams
There
out
are.
there in the world. It just makes me wonder if people can go to all that time and energy to come up with this stuff.
Yeah.
What if they put their minds to something good,
What if they yeah.
and not crime,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Would it be nice if they put it towards something positive,
Yes,
say?
exactly. It's always frustrated me that the scammers, of course, aim towards people that are already having a tough time, like the
Yeah.
people
Yep.
unemployed looking for a job.
Right.
They're already having a tough time. Give them a break. And it's the same thing. Like we're selling a car right now, and it's a low value car. Just trying to sell that for a fair price, but there's scammers that are trying to
Oh, yeah.
the scam on that, and it's just like,
Yeah.
why aren't you going for the guy selling the Rolls Royce and not the PT
Yeah.
Cruiser?
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Same
Why
thing.
are you going after poor
Silly
unemployed people
people.
that are just trying to get by,
Yeah.
as opposed to the CEO of
Yeah.
Walmart or whatever? Probably because they've got a lot of people looking out for them, and of course the people that are unemployed don't have a lot of people looking out
Yeah.
for them,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really sad to me. And
Yes.
yeah, I was reading this. I hadn't heard of this reshipping thing before.
Yeah, no,
So
that's a new
yeah,
one to
it's a
me
new
as
one.
well. Yeah.
So yeah, so apparently your supposed job is to, yeah, receive these packages that get sent to you. They have goods in them.
Hmm.
You reseal them, take the old shipping information off, put the new shipping information on, and then, head to FedEx or UPS or the post office to ship them back out.
So I wonder if these folks that are what they call porch pirates, if you will, that are going around stealing packages off of
I
people's,
wouldn't doubt it.
porches, are they involved with this too? Is that why it's
It
so
Yeah,
prominent?
it wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me. Yeah, and yeah, but it was a new one for me, and I had to kind of reread the article about it. Like, huh, I hadn't heard of that. But yeah, in reality, they're dealing in stolen goods
Yeah.
most likely. But there's other job scams too. Just ones that um or people will be misleading. 'Cause I see, as a coach, there are a lot of these job opportunities that are on the job boards that are for coaches,
Hmm.
and then if you talk to the people, they're not, scammy, but they can be misleading, where it's like, oh, what they want is for you to be one of a gazillion coaches on a job board or a coaching board, basically like a coach's marketplace. And then, it's a total crapshoot as opposed, if you're gonna get any business from it.
Right.
But they advertise it like a role, like a job, and they have these job qualifications when in reality, it's basically you still trying to just sell your wares on a marketplace site.
Like kind of multi-level marketing kind
Kind
of
of,
thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
kinda like that, and, so it's not a scam, per se,
Right.
but it still to me is a bit misleading when you've got it on a job board listed as a job
Hmm.
and not a, online repository for something.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's interesting, what's out there, and I did see I don't know if you saw it, but, with the maritime industry, I did see, this feature article that was in the Sunday paper a couple weeks ago, and it had profiles of, women, who are working in the maritime industry, and they're supporting some of these nonprofits as well to help drive young folks
That's
and
great.
non-traditional employees, into the industry, so,
We
yeah, it's pretty
definitely
cool.
need more variety
We
in
do.
the hiring in the maritime industry for sure. Yeah, I mean, you can see it anytime. You you look at like even like the
Yep.
voters pamphlet on who's running for the port stuff. So I think that's good. Anything that can increase diversity is a
Yeah.
good thing.
For sure. And it's really fun to see their profiles, and I guess that there's about 70,000 people who work in the maritime industry here in Washington State. I didn't realize it was that many.
That doesn't surprise me
Yeah.
too much because we've got like two of the biggest ports in the country up here with
Yeah.
Seattle and Tacoma, and then smaller ports as well, like Everett and Olympia and
Bellingham.
Bellingham,
Yep.
and they all do a brisk business as well.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting. But yeah, that's great. So happy to see that, and for the organizations who are doing what they can to bring in diverse workforce. So always happy to see that. Well, thanks, Eric. So it's time for our first break already. When we come back, I'll introduce our guest for the show, Dave Montore, who's here to talk about his career path, as well as supporting veterans with career transitions and more.
Are you feeling challenged or frustrated without a plan for what's next in your career and life? Are you seeing writings on the wall for needing to make a mid to late career change and don't know how or what to do? Coach Lisa Downs of New Aspect Coaching can guide you to what's next, providing a fresh perspective and supporting you to create a clear and compelling vision for your future and a plan to move forward. Call Lisa at 425-216-3015. That's 425-216-3015. New Aspect Coaching, fresh perspectives for your career.
Welcome back to Reigniting You, the show that focuses on all aspects of making mid to late career transitions. I'm your host, Lisa Downs. A note that you can catch the show Voices of Experience with host Paul Casey this Wednesday at 3 p.m. here on KIXI. Voices shines a light on people with experience in their fields of travel, public affairs, adventure, health, and fitness, with an emphasis on sustaining your own business. That's Voices of Experience this Wednesday at 3 o'clock. I'm happy to introduce today's guest, Dave Montore. Dave is a U.S. Army veteran who spent most of his 23-year career as a Green Beret. When most people hear that term, they think action and combat, and Green Berets do that, but another little known mission of theirs is organizational training and development. Dave spent a lot of time training, coaching, and mentoring leaders, subordinates, and foreign militaries, as well as scouting for and placing unconventional talent. He's since brought those skills with him to the Microsoft Software and Systems Academy, where he now helps veterans transition into a career in tech. Hey, Dave, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
Hey, great to be here, Lisa. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. And I always like to start with guests, a bit of a tradition here on the show, to learn more about your career journey and past. So we learned a little bit there in your intro, but what's the story of how you've gotten to this point in your career?
Well, it certainly wasn't a linear path, right? What started off as a 4-year long expedition to get out of my hometown wound up turning into a 23-year career. I wish I could say everything went according to some grand plan or design, but that's just not the case. I joined the Army a year into community college. I was going to school and working 3 full-time jobs in a small town in upstate New York, and I was completely miserable. I wanted more. I wanted to suffer and to test myself, right? Like a lot of young men do. So I joined the Army. Became an infantryman and tried to see what I was made of. And that lasted about 3 years. And to some degree, I did find out what I was made of. But the sort of arbitrary nature of peacetime regular Army, pre 9/11 Army, was just not for me. So I made plans to get out. And right around that time, a good friend of mine had just returned from Special Forces selection and told me that he had found the hidden promised land of the Army that we were both looking for when we joined, the land of the quiet professionals, right? So I put my plans to get out on hold and I gave it a shot, and that worked out well. And I spent about 17 years as a Green Beret doing that. Most of it in South and Southeast Asia, training, as we said, coaching, mentoring foreign nation military leaders. Very heavy on emotional intelligence, cross-cultural communication, systems thinking, negotiation skills. A lot of fun. After doing that for about a decade, though, I needed something new. So I volunteered for a team that was made of some more senior folks doing operations and intelligence program management at some of our embassies. And that opened my eyes up quite a bit to the greater workings of the military planning and where we fit into the grand scheme of things, and diplomacy, foreign policy, all that good stuff. And but what it really did for me was give me a chance to work side by side with some very high level marketers and communicators, people who made friends and sold ideas at very high levels, where networking was like a way of life, not something you had to do at certain parts of your career. So, all of that you can imagine became just so useful when I made my own transition from the military to the civilian world in the middle of 2019. I originally landed a corporate communications role with a very well known global brand. But after about 6 months, I realized that I'd made a mistake and that wasn't for me. So I left that and landed doing what I'm doing now with the Microsoft Software and Systems Academy. So I took all those skills that I accrued throughout the years and put them to use every single day, helping other veterans make the transition from the military to civilian world. And then on the side, because I take my own advice when I tell people that they don't have to get fulfillment from only one place, that they probably need some kind of creative outlet. I also have a small copywriting business where I've helped service-based businesses, photographers, coaches, and then some global e-commerce brands do with some marketing.
That's so cool. I love how you've got that, on the side as well. So, kinda having your hands in both of those worlds, and I'm sure you've learned a ton over your career and those experiences in the Army and now with your current work. What would you say is a key lesson or 2 that really stands out for you?
Yeah, I'd say in the context of a career pivot, one of the bigger lessons I've learned is that very little of this actually comes back to skills or education, right?
Mm,
And I first learned this actually when I tried out for special forces. I was surrounded by people who were bigger, stronger, faster, smarter than me, but I outlasted them because very average-looking guys like me, outlasted them because we were just more willing to do the hard stuff than they were, right? So
mhm.
it's not about being the best of anything. It's really not. More than anything, the people who succeed are the people who are willing. And when I say willing, I don't mean to sound cheesy, like willing to do whatever it takes or anything like that. I'm not talking about the obvious stuff like being willing to put in long hours or hard work. That's like table stakes, right? I'm talking about willingness to do really uncomfortable things like look stupid or come across as naive, which happens when you're new at something, right? We pay a lot of lip service to trying new things or putting yourself out there or don't be afraid to fail. But, we forget what it actually feels like to do those things. It's not glorious to fail. It's not glorious to feel naive. And when you really think about it, put yourself on the market for something you never done before is to run the risk of looking like all those things. And, that
Yeah.
scares people way more than simply being considered new and ignorant. I
Mhm.
can deal with that, right? And there are other examples, but that's one I've heard repeatedly. You've also got to have a strong internal drive for whatever it is you're trying to do because, you're going to endure really long bouts of silence when you're doing this, right? Total absence of feedback, especially when it comes to career transitions. So, part of the reason you hear people say over and over again that you have to have that deep why, right? That I'm sure you tell your clients is,
Yeah.
you're going to do long periods without knowing if what you're doing is even working, right?
Mhm.
So for some time, you're going to be running on faith that it's going to play out in the end and that it's all going to work out. And so, in order to do that, you just have to be driven internally because the market's just not going to really necessarily encourage you or correct you in obvious ways along the way. So knowing why you're doing it and then having the willingness to do the hard stuff that nobody talks about, it's just key. It
Yeah.
trumps talent and skill all day.
Well, thanks so much for sharing that, and I
Yeah.
think, you raise 2 great points, around that vulnerability piece, so
Yeah.
allowing yourself to be vulnerable, which, to me only shows authenticity, that you're a human
Yeah.
and, a real person, and yeah, it's just, and understanding that sometimes stuff is gonna go into that black hole, never to be heard
Yep.
from again, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. It's
Frustrating as that
uncomfortable.
might
Yeah.
be. It is. It's frustrating and uncomfortable and makes you question, can lead to, if you let it, can lead to lower confidence too, I think.
Oh yeah. If you let it fester, it absolutely will.
And what else have you found that was particularly helpful to you as you made your different career transitions? So whether that was decisions you made information, people who supported you, resources?
Yeah, one of my biggest takeaways, especially coming from a career where inner strength is so appreciated and valued, was allowing myself to lean on others, right? I mean, it really is. I'll even go so far nowadays to say that I believe it is a fool's errand to try to make it on your own, right? I mean, for as long as there have been human beings, there have been human being problems, and therefore human being solutions, right? So, chances are whatever you're trying to solve or work through has been solved before, right?
Yeah.
So, and just to not reach out to people who already went through what you're currently going through is just foolish, in my opinion. So, find a mentor and lean on them. And then, and I understand, like, from an intellectual curiosity perspective, because I'm this way, that, wanting to figure it out on your own or find your own path. But, understanding when to allow yourself to play around like that, and when it's time to reach out for guidance. You're just going to save yourself a lot of time and heartache if you do it. So, but along with that, my second takeaway would be, networking is not a dirty word if you're doing it right. It gets a bad rap in a lot of communities. I'd say none worse than in the military. Most of us, when we start our transition, we think of it as this sleazy thing you have to do, almost like a rite of passage into the civilian world, right? But
Yeah.
it's just not that if you know how to do it, right? So one of the authors of a fantastic book, I'm sure you're familiar with, Designing Your Life, Dave Evans. He did a podcast where he explained how he taught his students to think of networking as asking for directions, right? So no different than if you were walking through college campus one day and didn't know where you were going and you had to stop someone and ask them how to get to the library, right? I mean, you're not bothering them, you're not wasting their time, you're just acknowledging that they've been around longer and that they know where you're going, and you're just saying, hey, how do I get to where you've already been, right? So, approaching networking that way, allowing yourself to reach out to others who've already been where you're trying to go to. Yeah, I found those to be just a solid approach to getting through those uncertain times. Someone's done it before you. Just find them and lean on them. Let yourself do that.
That's great. Yeah, all about building relationships, right?
That's it. That's it.
Yeah. Was there ever a time when you had some regret about a career decision?
Uh, this may sound a little bit of a cop out, but I really try not to entertain regret in cases like this.
Mhm.
I wasn't always this way, but my own story unfolded the way it did because it was supposed to, and I truly believe that. I mean, I used to wish I had tried out for a particular specialized unit in the Army, but let's say I could travel back in time and do that. I mean, I wouldn't have my family, and for all I know, I could be dead, right? So, and when I first retired, even, I wish I had done so at the 20-year mark instead of waiting until the 23-year mark. But if I did that, then I wouldn't have had the depth of self awareness and the soft skills, that I had when I did retire,
Yeah.
and it would have just been a much more daunting and difficult process. So it's all a trade off, and changing anything might have made some things better, but it would have altered other things. So I don't even bother with it. Yeah, no, and I will say this too. I've actually had some recent conversation with friends about this, managing regrets, and I'm really grateful that I have this perspective. I consider it a gift from my father, because I mean, just regret from what I've seen is just might as well be synonymous with pain,
Mm.
for all it does for you.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's really good, and yeah, it's like to me, it's just all a learning experience, and yeah, it's, if we had gone down other roads, we wouldn't have the people in our lives that we do now
yeah,
necessarily. So,
yeah.
that's
It's all
that's
part of the
very
ride.
it is, yeah, very cool, and, what recommendations do you have for someone who's going through a time of change and transition just to stay focused and motivated and positive throughout the process?
Yeah, yeah. As someone who used to try to have his hands on every aspect of his life, I say that you know you have to have a really clear idea of what you do control and what you don't, and the things you don't control, like, they aren't going to change or improve just because you're worrying about them. And we all say we know this, right? We all say we know this, but we don't act like it, right? Look up the Serenity Prayer and do your best. Just Google that and do your best to embody that. That's what I would say. That short little blurb, it may sound like an Instagram motivational post, but that thing has helped. it's helped millions of alcoholics stay sober, right?
Mhm.
And not for no reason. And there is no reason why it can't get you through this little bout of ambiguity in your career shift, right? So I would say on that note, I spent almost 2 decades of my life in ambiguous environments. And let me say that chaos is the norm,
Yeah.
not the exception. And just because it's chaotic doesn't mean you've done something wrong or you're lost control. Like act
Yeah.
on what you can, let the rest go, eat well, drink water, sleep, stay connected, right? Especially with people, and you'll be fine. And I know nobody wants to hear that. We want a silver bullet to make the uncertainty go away. But I mean, the only thing that even closely resembles a silver bullet is to take care of yourself and just embrace the chaos and just
Yeah.
maybe allow yourself a daily dose of self forgiveness as well.
Yeah. That's good advice, and control what we can control.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah, and who would you say has been a big influence on your career or life that really contributes to who you are now or to your work?
Yeah, well, my father, first and foremost, when I became a father, I was told that the way I talked to my son would eventually become his inner monologue. And
Mm.
I can say that that is absolutely true. I still hear my father's voice daily, telling me to calm down or take it easy on yourself, David, or give myself a break. And it's a great built-in resilience mechanism for someone like me who can be just so scathingly self-critical. Now, another aspect about my father that's just always fascinated with me, and I feel like I've gotten to know him better since he passed, just from talking to his brothers and sisters, is that he was the oldest of 10, raised
Wow.
in raised in a very conservative, uh, traditional Catholic Irish Italian household in New York City in the early 1900s, right? But by the time I was a young adult, he was having me read books about the Buddha and Stoicism and Eric Hoffer, right? Not the mental and values-based framework he was raised with by any stretch, but he created and stuck to his own values, and then he passed them on to me and gave me permission to do that for myself, right? Which was huge. Um, and I'll say this too: when I first joined the army, I had a couple of leaders who went against the grain in terms of what leadership looked like in that peacetime pre 9/11 military I alluded to earlier, right? It was a pretty harsh place, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's almost like because there was no war going on that we had to prove our mettle in other ways, which
Mm.
looked a whole lot like too many regulations, way too much yelling and screaming. And I know it sounds a little petty, but in truth, that's part of why I almost left. After my first enlistment, it was very arbitrary. We didn't treat each other very well. But I tell you this, when my grandmother passed, we were about to leave for a training exercise, and the norm at the time was for leadership to say, "Sorry about your grandma. Pack your bags and get on the plane." Um, but my leaders stood up for me. They coached me through how to talk to our commander, how to get him to get me go home. One even drove me around to help me buy plane tickets and drop me off at the airport, which sounds like what a leader should do for his soldiers, but for the environment at the time, that was huge violation of cultural norms. And
Mm.
they didn't have to do that, right? But they went against the grain to do what was right.
Yeah.
And so, and I talked to that guy about 20 years later, and he barely remembered it, which was,
Wow.
I think, another lesson in itself, right?
Yeah, isn't
Because,
that interesting?
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Very
I've just tried to keep that stuff in mind and embody those traits where I stick to my own values, regardless of the social cost, and where I help people when I can, even if for no other reason than I'm in a position to do so.
That's great. Well, thanks so much, Dave, for
Yeah.
sharing about your career journey and lessons. And it's time for our next break. So when we come back, Dave and I will talk in more detail about career transitions for veterans and much more. Hi, I'm Lisa Downs, career and retirement transition coach and host of Reigniting You on KIXI. I guide age 40 plus professionals to gain clarity, a renewed sense of purpose, and a career transition plan within 90 days so you can lead a fulfilling life regardless of your age. If you're not sure what's next for you, I can help. Let's talk about what your future can look like. Visit yournewaspect.com or call me at 425 216 3015. That's 425 216 3015. New Aspect Coaching, fresh perspectives for your career.
Have a career transition related question or want to share your best or worst job story? Call 360-436-6496. That's 360-436-6496. Just leave a voicemail and we'll answer your question or share your story on a future show. Stay tuned for more Reigniting You with Lisa Downs.
Welcome back to Reigniting You, the show that discusses timely issues and topics about career transitions for Gen Xers and Boomers. I'm your host, Lisa Downs. A reminder that if you'd like to get in touch, you can head on over to my website, yournewaspect.com. There you can download and take my free career transition readiness quiz, as well as sign up for my free weekly career tips e-newsletter, or just send me a note. Be great to hear from you. That's yournewaspect.com. Well, we're here with Career Development Manager and former Green Beret, Dave Montore. Dave, let's go ahead and jump back into our conversation. What would you say is the top challenge or two that military veterans face when entering the civilian workforce?
Well, there's a couple of different ways to answer this. One from the perspective of a veteran who's just beginning their transition, or one who's just starting with their new private sector company. Those are like the two major gates. But because there are so many variables for the experience, for the people just starting at the new company, I'll focus on the common transition challenges. And one of them, without a doubt, and I know you've seen this, is their lack of private sector vocabulary, right? And I'm not talking jargon like, calling vacation PTO instead of calling it leave. That's easy stuff. I'm talking about how a lot of the skills we embody that make us valuable, we don't even realize are considered skills in the first place, right? The private sector names for things that we don't even realize are things in and of themselves. Quick example would be relationship management. Look, in the military, you work with other teams. You just do, right? It's not an occasion. It's just another day. It's not worth calling out. Certainly not worth calling out. But in the private sector, look, if you spend a good portion of your day facilitating cooperation between two entities, right, or more, you're really good at it, then relationship management is a strength you need to highlight, and a sought after one at that, right? But that's not the kind of thing you can Google and learn, right? So what that looks like as a challenge is that we market ourselves in all the wrong ways, or we undersell ourselves. So either we look at our hard skills and we think we have nothing to offer because hard skills don't transfer, right? Like, no one's going to pay me to carry a rifle in the woods or operate a certain radio. But we look at our soft skills and then we think we're more limited than we are. Usually we think too generically.
Yeah.
We focus on things like leadership or accountability, something that's often assumed a veteran possesses already, right? So it's already expected of us. So I would say one of the best things a transitioning service member can do is to get a feel for all the things they do on a daily basis, figure out what the private sector calls it, and then work that into their value proposition. And then a close second for this one is definitely looking at LinkedIn as just another social media platform instead of the job search force multiplier that it is. It is becoming more common to see military professionals engage on LinkedIn while they're in, right? And talk openly about their career moves. I just passed Ranger School today, whatever. But a lot of the combat arms and special operations branches approach the platform, I would say, with an abundance of caution, as an understatement, or they just avoid it outright. And that makes sense for security reasons while you're in. But, when you're transitioning, like, you need to get past that, man, and understand that LinkedIn is not Facebook, and then it's not going to be really hard, or it is rather going to be really hard to find a job if people don't know you're looking for a job in the first place, right? So, learning a new language and leveraging LinkedIn are what I consider the top two tactical challenges for transitioning service members.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And what's been your experience, or what have you seen with veterans taking the first job that comes along once they leave the military? And what's the impact of doing that potentially?
Yeah, that really depends on how you're wired, like personality traits speaking, right? So, ultimately you need to land something. Everyone does. You need to keep the money rolling in somehow, even if it's just you with no debt, right? You have to account for Maslow's bottom layer of food, water, shelter, sustenance, safety. Some people can do literally anything to cover that. They're not looking to climb the ladder of self-actualization through their employer, right? They just need a paycheck. They want their work to fund their lifestyle. People like that can take any job that comes along, and the transitions tend to be pretty easy, almost fun. It's the rest of us, people like me, where it gets tricky, right? So, I
Yeah.
mean, if you're like me, you need a lot of things to line up in order to enjoy your job, your daily life. You need a higher
Mhm.
purpose to your work. You need to be surrounded by good people. And there's just no awesome paycheck that's going to make up for a deficit in either one of those two things.
Yeah.
There's a statistic that says about 40% of veterans will leave their first post-military career within the first year, and a full 80% will leave their second post-military job before the end of the second year. And I think a big reason for that is because we spent our time in the military doing jobs we didn't like and
Yep.
suppressing our own wants and needs and basically making do, right? Which is honorable when you're in, making the best of our situations for an okay paycheck, right? But then we separate, and for some of us, a company comes along and offers us sometimes a pretty righteous paycheck, right? And we see some red flags about culture and leadership in the company, but we overlook them. We see that paycheck and we think, I have dealt with much worse for much less. This will be a cakewalk. But it's not that way. It's just not. When you're no longer on orders and you no longer have to stick out that bad assignment, it is a whole different ball game. And so, a lot of us, we overestimate our ability to put up with less than ideal circumstances, and
Mhm.
and we don't allow ourselves to accept as valid like our own wants and needs. We consider that being picky or high maintenance, even though it's not. It's just you're prolonging the whole transition and the ambiguity for yourself and your family by doing this, right? So, you owe it to yourself, to get that right. It's not high maintenance to honor your needs, but the military drills it in us. It drills it into us that is the case, and so, but it's
Yeah.
really not. It's really not. So, if you're the kind of person who struggles that struggles with that, rather than you just think of how much more people get out of you, right? When your needs are met and you're doing, just understand that you're doing the world a service when you take care of yourself.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, and so much of, as you know, so much of career transition is about doing that self-assessment piece
Huge.
and considering all sides of yourself. When it comes to deciding what's next. And what do you see is needed with that? Whether coming out of the military, a military career, or otherwise.
Yeah. So kind of branching off my previous answer, the first thing you might consider is trying to understand what kind of person you are. But like even before building on that, I talked a little bit about that, but I want to bring up the fact that a lot of service members don't even start that self-assessment process until they're less than 6 months away from transition, which is a huge mistake.
Wow. Yeah.
Huge mistake. Like we've just spent how many years suppressing our own wants and needs for the good
A
of the
lot. Yeah.
organization, admirably so. Some of us, yeah, it's what 2 decades, right? And that's not something you can flip a switch and turn back on in a matter of days or weeks, not even months. I mean, it takes a lot of us closer to a year or more to get even close, and then another 2 or 3 years to figure it out. And there's a reason there's so many veterans out there saying they're 3 years post separation and still in transition.
Yeah.
They're not making a lame joke. That's absolutely true. Now, you know, that said, like, what should it look like? I mean, there's a ton. There's a ton of self-assessment tools out there, Strengths Finders, personality test. But even before that, you can start just by asking yourself some really simple questions, like, how much of your fulfillment needs to come from your job, right? Can you take something that's good enough for now while you chase fulfillment outside of your work? Is the work even good, or is the work enough, or do you also need to be surrounded by certain kinds of people, right? So, like I said, it's not a matter of being picky. It's just a matter of understanding your personality, not fighting how you're wired. And so, the more willing you are to dig into this stuff and understanding what you need to thrive on a daily basis, the easier it's going to be to identify, but also to tell people what you're looking for. Right? We
Yeah.
talked about
Yeah.
asking people for help. So, and you know the deal. This is applicable for anybody in any life phase transition, not just the military, but you know, another thing I would just say, one little thing is transitioning service members need to treat this like it's a major life phase transition, because it absolutely is.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And
Yeah.
and about how long does it typically take for someone to fully transition out of the military, and what contributes to that time frame?
Yeah. And so, I mentioned a couple numbers earlier, but I will say it depends on how willing, and there's that word again, right? Like how willing the person is to do the inner work to understand who they are, where they came from, and what they need to thrive. So, like in the previous answer, I talked about the importance of knowing how you're wired, but there's also, having a comprehensive understanding of your whole story, right? Like that's huge. There's some interesting scientific literature out there about the concept of identity integration and the treatment of PTSD. And whether you've been to combat or not doesn't really matter. The point is that any kind of challenge to your identity will result in some level of pain or discomfort.
Yeah.
And of course, leaving the military challenges your identity, not in a bad way, but that doesn't matter. It challenges who you see yourself as, and that's no small thing, right? But a lot of people don't even understand that that's what's going on. They think it's something more surface level, right? Like they chose the wrong job, or they missed their old unit, or they missed the old routine, something like that. And maybe some of that's true on some scale, but often there's something way deeper going on, and it has to do with your ability to look back in your life and make sense of your whole story arc, from childhood until where we are today, and be in that, like, as if your life were being transposed onto a map, right? It will then inform where you're going to go from here. So you can imagine if you were looking at a map and trying to figure out where to go, it would be hard to do so if you didn't know where you came from and where you currently are. And you need to know those things before you can make detailed plans for where to go. It's no different with a career life transition.
Yeah.
Until you've made sense of your story in its entirety, you're going to have some underlying sense of restlessness, and you're not going to know where it's coming from. You're just not going to feel settled. And that's what makes transitions last as long as they do. So
Mhm.
those who take the time to make sense of and integrate with their story, they have shorter transitions. Those who fight it, they struggle, and it takes them a little bit longer to adjust.
Yeah. Good to know. And what's the crux of your work with the Microsoft Software and Systems Academy? And what do you enjoy most about it and find challenging with it?
Yeah. So for MSSA, I handle what we call the professional development side of the program for cohorts of 15 current and former service members at a time.
Mm.
Um, Basically, we help them become network admins and software developers, right? So we have a technical curriculum, and then we have the um, job search career pivot side, which is where people like you and me and our mutual friend Jennifer Master operate, helping people build out their resumes and prepare for interviews and getting a LinkedIn profile up, and
Yep.
and ready, and coaching people, right? Things like that. And until recently, one of my biggest challenges was actually getting the time to do the introspection with them that we've been talking about. So,
Mm.
because for a while we just didn't have enough time in the curriculum. We just didn't have the space to do it, to really work that in. But um, I work on an amazing team with some awesome people, and they've since revamped the curriculum, and it's pretty incredible what they put together. So, the first third or so of the program, it's 4 months long. The first third or so is just the participants trying to make sense of themselves and what they want, and what they're good at, which is so sorely needed and so awesome to see. But my other greatest challenge has always been, and probably always will be, just giving each individual the time that I think they deserve, right? Like there's one of me, there's 15 of them, and I think I'm always going to have that feeling that I wish I could have done more for each person. Yeah, I mean, you could honestly have cohorts of two, and I'll still wish I could have done more. I'll just have to make peace with that. But the best part of the job is always the email or the DM or the text that comes in that says, Dave, I got an offer. There's just no beating that. There's just no beating that.
That's great. Yeah, it's how I feel when a client lands that role, right? Lands a job
Yeah.
and
Oh, it makes
yeah,
it all
makes
worth
it
it.
makes it
Yeah.
through the other side and yeah, for sure. And speaking of that introspection piece, what would you say are 2 to 3 top questions you think we can all be asking ourselves when we're looking to make a career transition?
Yeah. All, not just military. I would say the first question I would focus on is, to ask yourself like what you're trying to get out of this, right? Like, which,
Yeah.
it doesn't seem like any big deal on the surface, but when you dig down a little bit, that's not as easy an answer as most people initially suspect, especially, for service members who have been trained to put the organization first. But even for people who are never, in the military, there's still a lot of people thinking about this who were raised in households where you put the family first, or where you deferred to the parents' wishes, or maybe Maybe you've internalized some society imposed limiting beliefs, right? You can't do that unless blah, 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 right? There's all kinds of rules we live by that have no reason to even exist. And there's all kinds of reasons why people might want to change but struggle to make it happen. So allowing yourself to get clear on why you want to make the change and what you want to get out of it is probably the single best thing you can do. And leading off of that, the second thing is, now that you've identified what you want, is ask yourself if a career transition is even what you need, right? Is that even necessary? Just make sure that that's the answer to your problems before you go making any big moves. Because, I mean, we say this cliche all the time, right? Is that most people don't leave a job, they leave a manager, right?
Yeah.
So ask yourself, are you unhappy with the people you're surrounded by, or are you unhappy with the actual work, right? Is there something less disruptive that might also satisfy this desire? Can you move to another team? Can you get a side gig as a creative outlet? Just make sure you're doing this for the right reasons, and don't think that that's the only option out there, right? It's a disruption, man. It's a lot, right? And you know that. And then the third question I would say is, you know, is the timing right for me to do this? So, obvious questions for timing would be your financial situation, state of the industry, right? But don't forget about life stuff, right? Your personal life. How balanced are you right now? You need to be at your best during this time, during this process, and it is hard to do so if you're already overwhelmed, right? It is insanely stressful trying to manage a career transition while helping an elderly parent navigate healthcare, for example. Um, and I know a lot of Gen Xers, right, in their 40s and early 50s right now are feeling that. So, and timing in general typically is one of those things we have very little control over. So, and the very few chances you do have a chance to exert some control over it, go ahead and allow yourself to do so. But yeah,
Yeah.
what are you trying to accomplish? Is this the only option, and is now the right time? Those are the ones I would suggest you ask yourself.
Well, thanks so much for that. So
Yeah,
Dave, last question is how can people
yeah.
find you if they'd like to get in touch?
Yeah, I am the only Dave Montore on LinkedIn, which makes me feel just so special. And then I also have a work in progress landing page for my copywriting business. Whether you need marketing help or not, if you just want to go through that, that's just as easy. There's a contact form there, but that's at montoresolutions.com. You can find me there. So
Great.
yeah,
Well, thank you so much, Dave, for being
you
here and
bet.
sharing your tips and recommendations. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I appreciate the offer. Thanks, Lisa.
You bet. Take care and have good holidays.
Yeah, you too.
All right. Well, it's time to wrap up today's show, and that means it's also time for my reignition recommendation, your weekly career transition tip, regardless of your age. My tip for you this week is to get out of any victimhood by letting go of resentment and grudges. It really doesn't serve you well or anyone else well to really be holding on to things from the past. Or if you were, finding that you're thinking, well, why me or woe is me when you're in career transition, that's really taking on that role of victim. So instead of that, thinking about, well, who or what might I need to forgive to move forward? Sometimes that's ourselves for our own behavior. Sometimes it's other people if we feel that we've been slighted or wronged in some way at a previous job with a previous employer or manager. Sometimes it's really recognizing what your role is in things. So, what have you done or haven't done to contribute to the situation? And then acknowledging that, and then what are some new habits or new behaviors that you'd like to take on to change that in some way for the better? And just really recognizing, kind of goes back to what Dave was talking about earlier in the show of, controlling what you can control. And so much of what we can control is our own mindset and our own attitude. And really making an intentional choice in terms of the behavior that we want to embody to be able to move forward. So just get out of victimhood, let go of any grudges or resentments you might be holding on to. And just a reminder that if you'd like to get in touch, you can go to my website, yournewaspect.com, where you can download and take my free career transition readiness quiz or sign up for my free weekly career tips e-newsletter or send me a note. That's yournewaspect.com. So thanks, Eric, for your support today. What jumped out at you from our time with Dave?
Oh, what a great conversation! What a fascinating guy!
Yeah.
And I thought the questions that you should ask yourself before considering career transition were very
So
important.
good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so good.
So good.
And I only am sad that we didn't get to ask him what he thinks about that song, "The Fighting Men, the Green Berets." You know that song?
The Green Beret song.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
because I've
Like,
never
rats.
talked
Should have
to a
asked
Green
him that.
Beret before,
Dang it.
and that's such a great song, in my opinion. But
That's excellent.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much. And join us next Monday at 3 o'clock when my guest will be business transition expert John Martinka. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week on Reigniting You.